Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We are discussing Rush, and we've made it to their fifth studio album. This is A Farewell to Kings. So this was released in 1977, and it is an utterly fantastic album. Certainly for me, it's a contender for one of my all-time favorite Rush albums. It captures Rush at, right in the middle of that golden age of their progressive rock writing, the expanded song structures and whatnot. And, it is, for me, actually, A Farewell to Kings represents the album when the fully formed Rush that we know and love properly arrived. This is their arrival album. A lot of people will challenge that. That's probably controversial. I think a lot of people would say that, Rush's first out-and-out classic is 2112. If you watch my previous video on 2112, 2112, the song, is an out-and-out classic. It is a fantastic song and one of Rush's finest moments. 2112, the album, is a bit unbalanced. Again, it's got lots of good stuff on the second side, but ultimately, I think A Farewell to Kings is a much better album than 2112. It's much more cohesive as a whole. It works better as a total package. It's consistent from the first moments of the first side right through to the final moments of the last side, and that's something that was missing on 2112. And, when talking about A Farewell to Kings, in terms of, the band's spirit, the word that I always think of is confidence. That's the best word to describe it. You have to think, back, when they were recording 2112, it was kind of, a critical situation for Rush. It was like a do-or-die moment. There was a lot of pressure from the record company to make, more commercial songs. They were telling them that, no, you can't write any more of these, extended 20-minute songs, and, Rush were defiant, and they rebelled against the record company, and they made the 20-minute song, and, as it turned out, it was a huge success, and, that must have boosted their confidence to a huge level, having proved the record company wrong. And then, what they proved to the record company was that, they could, achieve that level of success on their own terms. And what it did for them is it won them total creative and artistic freedom. The record company never really bothered them after the success of 2112. And that's great, and that shows on this album quite a bit. The big notable thing about A Farewell to Kings in terms of the sound of the album is that they have expanded their palette on a huge level. Neil Peart expanded his drum set quite a bit. He got some tubular bells, there's chimes, there's xylophones, a whole array of cowbells and woodblocks that he introduced to the kit, and he uses all of them at many points in all the songs on here. So that really expands the sound palette. Their sonic palette is much broader. And the other notable thing is the synthesizers. Geddy Lee is using a lot more synths on this album. He did use a little bit of synthesizer on 2112, but not to nearly the same extent as Farewell to Kings. And it's not overbearing either. The synth is still, it's a supplementary instrument that's there to, like I said, expand the sonic palette. But there's a few moments out of Farewell to Kings where he's using the synth as the lead instrument to do the main melody, and that's great. Like I said, it expands the sonic palette and it gives them a much broader range of sounds to choose from when it comes to creating their songs, and it's one of those things that contributes to their great reputation of there's so much going on in Rush's music, and yet there's still only 3 guys in the band, and that's the incredible thing. And Farewell to Kings is great because it captures them playing with all these new instruments and toys and whatnot, and I'm sure at this point they were still trying to figure out how they're going to use it on stage, because they never got any additional members to play with them on stage. They always wanted to keep it a trio, which is all very, very cool and very, very good. But yeah, like I said, this is a hallmark moment. It's the first record that was at the same level of the bands that they were so influenced by. I'd say that A Farewell to Kings is at the same level of a Foxtrot by Genesis or a Fragile by Yes. So like I said, in that sense, this is their arrival album. This is the first proper classic Rush album as we know it, and that's my argument. Great album cover as well. I like the. It's very proggy. I get the old world, king, dummy king, and whatnot, and modern world demolition and construction and whatnot. It's kind of a cool thing. Notably, the album was recorded in Wales, so it's the first time that the band had recorded outside of Canada. And again, as a group of young men that were so into so many British bands, it must have been really, really cool to be recording in the UK. To have that experience, I can only imagine that would be very, very neat. But yeah, let's talk about the tracks that make this wonderful album up, shall we? So it opens up with the title track, "A Farewell to Kings," and this is a fantastic song. It's almost like a mini epic. It's only 5 minutes 53 seconds, just under 6 minutes long. But it is still like a multi-section kind of a piece, and it's really, really good. The very opening moments of the song and of the album are just some very gentle, classically inspired acoustic guitar licks, and it makes a nice little melody. It's very, very tranquil and mellow, and very proggy to open with some classical guitar. And we hear that expanded sonic palette right away too, because that intro with Alex Lifeson's acoustic is supplemented with Peart's xylophone, and there's a little bit of keyboard that does some flourishes on that as well, which is really cool. So it's very tranquil, that opening few seconds, but it is all three members playing. It's just quite intense. There's also some bird song at that beginning, which is nice. But anyway, the track rolls into the first theme. Boom, down, 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 down. Classic little bit of Rush, and goes into a little arpeggiated bit, and then once the vocals kick in, it just it's a tour de force. It's a fantastic classic proggy Rush song from the era. The middle section is really, really good. The guitar solo is fantastic, and the vamp under the guitar solo is great too. Boom, doom, boom, 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 down, down, boom, down, boom, 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 down, down. Again, Dream Theater. You can hear the Dream Theater influence loud and clear on moments like that. Really, really good. Goes into another section that's a little bit more tranquil. Some nice little arpeggiated guitar lines, and yeah, it's a fantastic track. It all it goes back into some of the themes that it starts out with, and finally finishes with some more of that classical guitar. And it's a great track. It's almost a forgotten track. Rush has had a great reputation. They always bring obscure songs back into the set. That became kind of a trademark. It's like, oh, what strain, what less popular track are they going to throw into the set this year? And they never really played "A Farewell to Kings" that often. They didn't. I think they played it a bit around the time in the late '70s, but they never brought it back into the set for some reason. I'm not sure why, because it's a great track. It's a classic as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, but still, it is not quite as good as track 2 on side 1, "Xanadu." This is a contender for one of Rush's greatest creations, I think. This is a really, really, really great song. Certainly one of their best epics. It's on a different level from any of the stuff that's on Caress of Steel, and I mean, I'd say I like Xanadu more than the song 2112. I think it's a tighter arrangement, but it still has a great story, and there's still lots of different sections and verses that the song goes through. It's really, really cool. The intro is utterly fantastic. We're introduced to some of Peart's strange percussion, and there's some Alex Lifeson's doing those kind of whiny guitar licks with the volume knob and whatnot, that classical technique. And it's really, really cool, and it winds its way into this guitar lick. And goes into a syncopated, Peart and Geddy Lee go into the syncopated rhythm that goes into it, and it's got so many wonderful sections to it. Like I said, it is a contender for one of Rush's greatest tracks, and unlike some of their other epics, which are typically marked out by different sections, there's no song sections in Xanadu. It's just it is one piece of music, and it just makes sense. Even though it's 11 minutes long, it's still a coherent singular piece. The vocal sections, like the high energy verses, are just great. It's just absolutely epic, and there's all kinds of cool little arrangements. Like the second time it goes into that, the sort of medley verse there when Alex Lifeson does this quick little lick. Oh, I'm sure you'll know the section I'm talking about if you're watching this, but yeah, it's utterly fantastic, and it's so dynamic. I love all the ups and downs that it goes through. Like after the medley sections, it goes into that really nice synth line. And that's one of the first real notable examples of a synth line being the main melodic, piece of a song, which is really cool. But again, it's supplementary. That timbre just suits the song so well, and it suits the lyrics, which of course are in that fantasy realm once again. Talking myths and legends. And normally, as I said before, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the fantasy lyrics. I like the sci-fi type lyrics, but I don't know. Xanadu just works for me as a whole. It's so great, even I love the for I have dined on honeydew and drunk the milk of paradise. There's something resonant about those words. It's just a fantastic piece, and it winds its way up, big finale, and what more can be said? It's a classic track. If you like 70s prog and you haven't heard Xanadu, then you must get Xanadu in your life. It's wonderful. One of their best songs. Anyway, we flip the record over. It's funny, Wikipedia says that there's actually that Closer to the Heart is on the first side, but as you can see from this particular copy, Closer to the Heart opens the second side. Maybe they've changed that format for remasters that have come out. I'm not sure. But anyway, side 2 on this copy opens with Closer to the Heart, which is far and away the most popular song on the album. It's the most well-known song. It is the pop song on the album. Rush had, even though they famously, rebelled by writing, 2112 and that, when they were asked not to do any epics, they were still not object to doing, simple poppy songs. All of their albums have at least one song in that sort of format. And, Closer to the Heart, it's far from being the best song on the album, but it's a great song. It is a well-written, well-produced, well-arranged little piece. A lot of people tend to think of it as, or at least I always thought of it as almost being like the ballad of the album, but it really isn't. It is it's a rocking song. It's not a heavy song. It's not like some of the metal elements that are on here as well, but it's a great little piece. I love the tubular bells that Peart uses. That one moment before it, everything kicks in. Ding, 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 ding. That's quite nice. Yeah, famous song. Lots of people know Closer to the Heart. Definitely the most well known on the album. We move on to track 2 of side 2, which is Cinderella Man. This is kind of, is it a forgotten classic? I'm not sure if it's worthy of being considered a classic. It is, one of the weaker tracks on the album. It certainly doesn't stand up to anything that's on the first side, and it's not perhaps not quite as tight as Closer to the Heart, but it's all relative, right? The only reason Cinderella Man as a song feels a little lesser is because of the great songs that are also on this album. If you were to take Cinderella Man and put it on the second side of 2112, it'd be one of the best songs on the second side, It is more of that proggy mindset than any of the songs on second side of 2112. Lots of cool little arrangements, and it's cool, it's cool hearing, the way that some of the guitar licks, are referenced in different parts of the song, if you know what I mean. Quite cool. It's got a nice acoustic chorus, which shows, Geddy Lee's starting to mature in his singing style. He's not always doing, the high pitched, thrashy, wailing rock and roll voice. And there's a few real tasteful moments in Cinderella Man where you can really hear Geddy articulating certain moments, which is great. And he got much better at that as they went along. Interestingly, Geddy Lee wrote the lyrics to Cinderella Man as well, which is which is kind of interesting. You can see how influenced he is by his own drummer's lyrics because you compare the words on Cinderella Man to some of the lyrics that he wrote on the first album. There's definitely, you can see the influence there for sure. But yes, it's a pretty good track. That takes us to Madrigal, which is track 3 of side 2, track 5 overall. And this is a nice track. This is another one that's kind of easy to forget because it's just 2.5 minutes long and very light, very tranquil. But it suits this kind of 70s prog album. It takes me back, kind of like Tears from 2112. It takes me back to Genesis, Nursery Crime era or Trespass era. That early Genesis style. And there's some nice little keyboard flourishes that come through, and there's little very sort of classical influences. There's a bit of Yes there as well, which is quite interesting. And again, very easy to overlook because the next song and the final song on the album is one of Rush's all-time greatest moments ever in their career. Cygnus X1, Book 1, The Voyage. How's that for a pretentious proggy title? But funny titles aside, it is an absolute out-and-out classic moment of not only Rush but of progressive rock in general. It is hugely influential, and it is just bonkers. It's so great. I think of it just as Cygnus X1. That's the way that I've always titled it. But it's kind of unlike any other epic that Rush had ever done. It's 10 minutes long. And there's actually very little singing in it. There's very little in the way of the vocals, but the playing on it, the performance on it is just so fantastic. There's other performances on other albums that are arguably better, but man, the way the song is arranged is just absolutely fantastic. It is a roller coaster. It's got some of the most frantic, heavy playing that Rush had ever done up to this point, and they didn't quite reach that level again, actually, in terms of the loud thrashiness that's present on parts of Cygnus X1. But it's great. Like I said, it's an absolute roller coaster. We're back into the sci-fi lyrics. Of course, Cygnus X1 talks about it is the story of an astronaut that bravely journeys forth through the galaxy into a black hole in the constellation of Cygnus X1. Which is, a crazy and terrifying theme. I think Peart must have been influenced a bit by Peter Hamill. The whole, the concept behind Cygnus X1 reminds me a lot of the song Pioneers Over Sea by Van der Graaf Generator. There must be some kind of correlation there, going up into a spaceship and, getting torn into shreds or whatever, through a black hole and, getting, it's that whole sci-fi theme, it's quite cool. But what makes Cygnus X1 great is not only the performance and because it is some just fantastic playing. It cannot be understated what great musicians Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neil Peart are, and that is on full force with Cygnus X1. But what makes the song so great, in addition to the wonderful playing, is how well it how successful it is in creating that landscape and creating the setting for the story. Like I said, there's not too many lyrics in the piece, but you really do feel like you're in the midst of a sci-fi thriller, and it feels like space, and you get that vibe of being in a rocket and exploring the cosmos and whatnot. And as things get tense towards the end of the story, the tension in the music builds up to an absolute frenzy, and it's one of the highlight moments of their entire career. It's so good. The narrative voice is back. That was one of the criticisms that I had when I talked about the Necromancer on Caress of Steel. They had that narrator that comes in and kind of punctuates the story. But this is different from that. The narrator on the Necromancer kind of comes in and just splits the story up and subdivides the sections of the song up. The narration on Cygnus X1 is just at the very beginning, and there's all kinds of weird synthesizers and sci-fi sounds and whatnot, and the narration simply sets up the premise of there's a black hole in the constellation of Cygnus. It's called Cygnus X1, and all this business. which is quite cool. And then all the synthy atmosphere kind of goes into this weird, chiming bell. It must be one of Neil Peart's tubular bells, but it's gone through some kind of processor and slowed down. Not a processor; it was just a tape. They just would have slowed a tape down. Back in the 70s, of course. But that sound is so great that it conjures up, visions of the vacuum of space, which is so great. And then that bass line comes in, boom, down, 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 down. The drums join in after a few repetitions, and finally the guitar kicks in, and the band is just, in high gear. That section is so great. It's probably some of the earliest examples of funky metal. It's heavy, but it's funky as well, and somehow it still manages to conjure up the sci-fi things. Somehow, which is amazing. And then it kicks into high gear. I mean, I can't go through all the individual sections, but because there's so many highlights. And like I said, it's a roller coaster. It goes from the most crazy frenzy. It goes from all that stuff to almost still quiet, those little arpeggiated bits. But it all illustrates the story, which of course, our protagonist, the astronaut, gets into his spaceship, which is called the Rocinante, and he travels forth into the constellation of Cygnus, and the climax of the song, after all this musical anticipation goes through its wonderful cycle. He is drawn into the black hole, and the gravitational force shreds him to pieces, and every nerve is torn apart. And the music of that section of the song, at the climax of the story when he's sucked into the black hole, is just awesome. It's some of the best playing ever. It cannot be understated. I'm talking too much about it. You just need to listen to it. If you've not listened to Cygnus X1 and you are a fan of prog, you need to get that into your life. In fact, you need to get all of A Farewell to Kings into your life, because it is a wonderful, wonderful album. And again, back to Cygnus X1, the way it all finishes after he's split apart, that moment every nerve is torn apart, is the highest note that Geddy Lee has ever sung on a Rush album, which is interesting. Which means probably highest note he's ever sung on any album, I would think. But after that, we get those mysterious chords towards the end of the song, which is so perfect because it's an abrupt ending, but it finishes the album so perfectly, and it gives you a sense of anticipation for the next album. Which all makes good sense because, of course, Cygnus X1 is actually only part one of a larger epic, which is continued on the next album, which is Hemispheres, which is another contender for the best Rush album ever, because it too is fantastic. But I think I'm blabbing away too much. I've made it to the end of talking about Cygnus X1, so that's the end of the album. It cannot be understated. I've probably overstated it. It cannot be overstated, I should say. But A Farewell to Kings is a really, really good album by Rush, and you should really check it out if you haven't already. And on that note, I will cut myself off. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you watched, make sure you hit a like and a subscribe, and there will be many more videos yet to come. The next of which will be, of course, Hemispheres by Rush. So stay tuned for then. Thank you very much, and you will see me in the future.